The wind came low over the green hills of Ayr, threading soft silver through the heather and the gorse, and in that breath of air there stirred the scent of wood smoke and wildflowers. The trees, old as the tales themselves, leaned gently in the hush, their leaves whispering things half forgotten. The sun was warm where it rested on the shoulders of the land, and somewhere far off a curlew cried, a single note echoing across an afternoon as slow as a dream. It was a day folded in stillness, and on that stillness rode the Fianna, warriors of light and law whose names walked ahead of them like banners in the mind. Their horses stepped lightly over moss and meadow, and their spears were slung at ease, not for battle, but for the long peace of late summer. And among them rode Oisín, son of Fionn Cumhaill, his gaze far off, though his body moved with the rhythm of the earth. His hair, sun-spun and falling to his shoulders, caught the light like the sea on the edge of morning, and his thoughts, though he did not speak them, turned as they often did to things just beyond the horizon. He was a poet among warriors, a dreamer clad in bronze and fur, and while he laughed with the others and sang when fires burned low, there was a quiet in him that seemed always listening, as though some part of his soul waited for something only the winds could bring. If this story has brought you a moment of peace, let your support be known with a gentle click to subscribe, and more myths will come to find you. The Fianna Cycle holds many such tales, of Fionn and the salmon of knowledge, of Diarmuid and the boar, of Cumhaill swift-footed and the hunt through night, but none so strange nor so soft as the story of Oisín and the land beyond time. A story not of war but of wonder, not of battles but of beauty. It begins not with the clash of sword on shield, but with a sound like bells in the distance. They heard it first from the western edge of the glen, a music that was not quite music, a shimmer in the air, as if the sky had drawn breath. The horses stopped without command, even the birds fell silent, and then, through the high grasses and the dancing light, she came, Niamh of the golden hair. She rode a white horse whose hooves did not touch the ground, and her cloak shimmered like starlight on the sea. Her hair flowed behind her like a stream of sunlight made real, and her eyes were not of this world. Blue as twilight, deep as forgetting. The Fianna, brave though they were, watched her with the quiet awe given to visions or dreams that walk while waking. She did not fear them, nor bow. She came like a breeze through open halls, and when she reached them, she looked only to Oisín. "Son of Fionn," she said, her voice low and sweet like wind in hollow stones, "I have come for you." Oisín did not speak at once. The air seemed to shift around him, and though he stood in the warmth of an earthly afternoon, the scent of salt and apple blossoms came to him as if from another world. He looked to his father, but Fionn was watching the sky, as though some answer might be written there. "Who are you?" Oisín asked at last, though the question felt thin in the golden silence. "I am Niamh Chin Oa," she said, "Niamh of the golden hair. I am daughter of Manannán mac Lir, and I come from Tir na Nog, the land where sorrow does not dwell, where age does not come, where love walks freely and forever." Her horse stepped closer, soundless even over stone. "I have heard your name in dreams," she whispered, "and the sea brought me your song. Will you ride with me, Oisín, beyond the edge of time?" The Fianna stood still. Fionn said nothing. No word rose from the gathered warriors. Only the wind moved. Oisín felt the ache of something not yet lost, and the pull of something never known. A breath, a heartbeat, a blink, and he stepped forward. Niamh offered her hand. Her fingers were cool, and in her palm lay the silence of centuries. He took it. The horse turned. The world seemed to hush, and as Oisín mounted behind her, his eyes passed once over the glen, the hills, the trees, the faces of the Fianna unmoving as stone, and then forward into the mist that rose like breath from the sea. They rode. No hoofbeat sounded, no echo followed. The grass bent, then rose, and the wind carried the memory of him like a song too soft to name. Where the mist had folded around the hills, the shape of horse and riders shimmered, then faded, until even the silence forgot their passing. Beyond that quiet, he found the sea no longer moved with the pulse he had known since boyhood. This was not the restless Atlantic of the western shores, but something older, wrapped in stillness, vast and untroubled, as though it had long forgotten the names of storms. the sky above them deepened into a blue so soft it felt like velvet drawn across the shoulders of the world. No gulls cried here, and no salt stung the wind. Instead, the air held the scent of blossoms that did not grow on any earthly coast, and the light itself shimmered with hues not born of any sun. The horse, whose hooves left no wake, carried them across this otherworldly sea, as if following a path hidden beneath the waves. The distance stretched beyond counting, yet time did not press its weight upon them. There was no sun rising or falling, no change in warmth or sky, and still the journey moved forward. Niamh, seated ahead, said little, yet her presence spoke through silence. Assured, still and woven with something that felt like sorrow turned long ago into peace, Oisín, though drawn forward by wonder, found his thoughts drifting backward. He remembered the rise and fall of a boar hunt in the heathered woods, the shouts of the Fianna echoing through trees, Fionn's quiet strength and the way he'd once stood with a hand on his son's shoulder, saying nothing as the firelight flickered between them. He remembered the taste of wild berries, the songs sung at dusk, the way the wind curled around the mountain tops of Slieve Gullion. Memory, for Oisín, was not a wound, but a weightless ache, one that sang softly through the hollow spaces of his heart. Then the horizon shifted. It began as a glow, low and golden, not from the sun, but from something deeper than light, an invitation that shimmered like the hush before a harp's first note. Slowly, a shape emerged from the sea's endless hush, an island gleaming, not in harsh brilliance, but in that soft radiance that clings to the edge of sleep. Fianna Cycle. Its shores curved like the arms of a mother drawing her child home. Hills sloped gently toward flower-laden meadows, and beyond them forests rose not dark or wild, but rich with calm green light. The trees here were taller than any in Ayr, their leaves humming with a music that could not be heard with ears alone. Blossoms the size of a hand hung heavy with scent, and the rivers ran clear as thought, slow as dreams. The horse stepped upon this shore with no pause, and Oisín's feet met the grass, which felt not damp or cold, but softly warm, like the breath of something ancient and kind. He looked around, and the sky above this place held no sun, yet glowed with an endless twilight, a light that never dimmed, nor rose. It simply was, like the hush before a lullaby. In the distance, towers rose, white and delicate as bone against the hills. Their spires caught the glow and scattered it, and there, beneath the arching boughs of trees older than grief, stood the folk of this land. They did not speak, but they bowed their heads as Oisín passed, as if greeting not a stranger but one long awaited. Fianna Cycle received him not like a guest, but like a returning part of itself. Days flowed without names or need. Here time did not count itself in hours or moons. There was no aging, no hunger, no loss. The land gave freely, fruit and music and warmth and peace. Oisín wandered its meadows, hand in Niamh's, and where they walked, petals unfolded, and birds sang without fear. He rode the white horse through forest groves where crystal streams curved through moss-soft roots, and butterflies the size of hands drifted past, their wings slow as breath. Sometimes he sat in gardens where lilies bloomed from silver pools, and he watched their reflection ripple beneath a sky that never darkened. And in those moments, he did not miss the world behind him. Other times, when the air grew still, his thoughts turned again to Ayr. He would remember the sound of the wind on Dunangus cliffs, or the rhythm of waves against the Skellig rocks. He thought of Fionn, where he might be now, or if he still hunted through the green hills, unaware of how far his son had drifted. Sometimes he thought memory was a tree that bent toward old winds, even when rooted in new soil. Yet the peace of Fianna Cycle held him gently. He danced in fields where stars bloomed like flowers, each step echoing with quiet laughter. He sang songs not of longing, but of stillness, and the people of the land gathered to listen, for they had no poets among them. In Oisín's voice, they heard echoes of a world they had chosen to leave behind. Time was not counted, but it passed. In Fianna Cycle, Oisín did not age. His hair remained dark, his limbs strong, his heart quiet. Yet inside something shifted, subtle, like the change in scent before rain. A longing he could not name began to rise. It came not as sorrow, but as a question. Not of what he had gained, but what he had left behind. Niamh saw it before he did. She watched him as he stood beside the sea that circled their island, watched how his eyes searched the horizon, not for ships but for memory. She touched his hand gently, and in her silence he heard the truth. One evening, if it could be called evening, for the light never dimmed, he asked her if he might return to Ayr, only to see if all was well, just to look, just for a while. She did not say no, but her voice, when it came, was slow and still. "If you go," she told him, "you may not set foot upon the ground of that land. If you do, the years will fall upon you all at once like a winter that never ends." He nodded, not fully understanding, but feeling the weight of her gaze like the hush before snowfall. She brought him the white horse again, the same that had carried them across the sea, and he mounted it with a heart both full and tremulous. The island did not say farewell. The people did not gather. Fianna Nog, in its stillness, watched him go without protest, and so he rode. Back over the sea that was not sea, beneath a sky that slowly grew pale, the scent of air drifted toward him on a breeze like breath remembered. The rhythm of waves grew more familiar. Gulls began to cry once more. The world he had left behind returned, not with thunder or fire, but in the hush of things remembered. Sometimes he thought returning was a form of dreaming, one shaped not by sleep but by silence. The coast of Ayr came into view like a memory rising through fog. He smiled, seeing again the cliffs he had once known, the shape of the hills like the lines of an old song. But something was wrong. The trees were changed, the stones wore moss unfamiliar, the villages he remembered were gone or had turned to ruin. When he called out, none knew his name. He asked after the Fianna, his voice bright with hope. They looked upon him with wonder, then sorrow. The Fianna, they said, were gone these many hundreds of years. As the sea breathed on, the memory followed, carrying him into the heart of a world that no longer knew his name. The hills of Ayr were still green, but not the green he remembered. It was a paler hue, a softened tone, as though age had brushed its hand across the island and dimmed its once fierce colour. The forests seemed smaller, their edges blurred by time. The streams no longer sang the same songs, and where the Fianna had once camped beneath oak and ash, only wind moved now, whispering through bracken and stone. Oisín rode through the land in quiet wonder, his heart echoing between joy and disbelief. The white horse beneath him moved lightly, never tiring, hooves silent as moonlight. Villagers paused to stare as he passed, marvelling at his face untouched by years, his garments bright as woven dawn. Some crossed themselves, others whispered of spirits and dreams. He spoke gently, asking their names, their fathers' names, and their fathers' fathers, searching for some thread of memory, but each time he found only unfamiliar echoes. He rode to places he once knew by heart, to the plain of Allen, where once the banners of the Fianna had caught the morning light like flame. Now only grass grew there, high and soft, bending in wind. The great hall where Fionn had feasted was gone, replaced by a mound of earth overgrown with ivy. Oisín dismounted, though the white horse snorted softly, uneasy. He knelt and touched the grass, tracing the ground as if it might remember. Beneath his palm the soil was cool and silent. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear the echo of laughter, the clatter of cups, the deep tones of the harp, the rustle of cloaks as comrades leaned close to tell old tales. He thought of Diarmuid, of Cumhaill, of brave Osgar. The air seemed to hold their shadows for a breath, and then the wind carried them away. Sometimes he thought memory was not a thing that stayed, but a tide that came and went, leaving patterns too faint to follow. He rose slowly and looked toward the west. The horizon blurred with a fine mist, and for a moment he wondered if Fianna Nog lay still beyond it, bright and waiting. He could almost feel Niamh's hand in his, her voice like the shimmer of wind on still water. Yet the pull of the world beneath him was strong, its quiet decay, its newness, its changed faces, and something within him needed to understand what had become of all he loved. He came upon a group of men one afternoon, labouring in a field that stretched beside a low crumbling wall. Their clothes were rough, their tools of iron, and they sang no songs as they worked. When they saw him approach, they paused, leaning upon their spades. One called out, asking who he was and from where he came. "I am Oisín," he answered softly, "son of Fionn Cumhaill of the Fianna who once guarded this land." They laughed, kindly at first, then uncertainly. One said that such names were old as myth, that Fionn and his warriors had been gone for centuries, their deeds sung by poets who themselves were dust. Another, younger man stepped forward, eyes wide with awe. He asked if Oisín spoke in jest, or if he was truly the son of that great leader of old. "I speak truth," said Oisín, and his voice trembled with a strange calm sorrow. "I rode once beside him. I have seen the dawn over Slieve Bloom and the fires along Loch Lane. I have heard his counsel and his laughter. Where is he now, if he is not here?" The men bowed their heads. "Gone long before our father's time," one said. "No man living remembers them, save in song." Oisín looked beyond them, at the hills and the open sky. The world felt lighter now, as if it had forgotten the weight of legend. He felt himself like a remnant of another season, neither alive nor dead, but wandering between the two. He turned his horse to go, but one of the men called after him. "Stay, stranger," said the man. "You seem weary. Help us move this stone and share our bread. Then tell us of the old days." The stone lay half buried in the soil, immense and dark, too heavy for mortal hands alone. Oisín smiled, for though he had not aged, his heart felt gentled by time. He wanted to help them, to feel for a moment part of the living earth again. So he dismounted, setting one foot upon the ground of air. The white horse reared, crying out, and the sound cut through the still air like the rending of sky. In that instant the years rushed upon him like a breaking wave. His back bent beneath their weight, his hair turned silver, then white. His strength, that had never waned, fled from his limbs like water spilling through open hands. The skin upon his face grew thin, and the fire in his eyes dimmed to a weary glow. The men stepped back, gasping, watching the bright rider of legend crumble into frailty before them. The great stone stood untouched. Only Oisín had changed. The horse trembled, eyes full of sorrow, and began to retreat step by step toward the horizon. The light that clung to it shimmered once like a memory of dawn, and then it was gone. The field was still again. The men came to him and lifted him gently. They saw that he could no longer stand, and his voice had softened to a whisper, like leaves in late autumn. They carried him to a nearby hut and laid him upon a bed of straw. They asked his story once more, and he told them, of Fionn and the Fianna, of the hunts and feasts, of the songs that had echoed through air when the world was young. He told them of Niamh and the white horse, and the bright land beyond the western sea where sorrow could not find its way. They listened, wide-eyed, not sure whether to believe, yet something in his voice, quiet and calm as a falling tide, made them weep. Sometimes he thought eternity was not the absence of time, but the slow remembering of it. In the days that followed, a few came from nearby villages to hear the old man speak. He told his tale again, though less with each telling, as if words were pebbles slipping from an open hand. Some said that St. Patrick himself came to his side and asked him of the world before the faith had spread. Oisín, they said, spoke with reverence, though his mind often drifted to other places, to forests that no longer grew, to faces that would never fade from his heart. The seasons turned outside his door, though he could no longer rise to see them. He listened instead to the sound of rain on thatched roof, to the quiet breath of the earth turning beneath him. He felt himself drawn slowly between two worlds, the one that had been and the one that waited beyond. In dreams, he heard the sea again, the calm, endless sea that shimmered under no sun. He saw Niamh's face lit by that unchanging twilight, her eyes filled with love. As the sea breathed on, the memory followed, softly like a forgotten melody stirring among reeds. Oisín sat astride the white horse, gazing upon the land that had once been his home, and for a long while he could not move. The air smelled the same, peat smoke faint in the distance, rain on the wind, the wild sweetness of grass rising from the fields, but beneath it lay a quiet that was not peace. The land felt older. It bore the hush of places that have waited too long for voices that will never return. He guided the horse forward through the meadows, where no hunter's horn sounded and no laughter rose from campfires. Once he passed an ancient oak he thought he knew, though its branches had grown thick with age and its trunk split open with moss. He dismounted slightly to touch it, hand trembling on bark that seemed to breathe with time. "How many seasons," he murmured, since last we met. Yet he heard no answer, only the sigh of the wind in the hollow heart of the tree. Villages appeared at last, though smaller and stranger. The people wore clothes of cut and colour unknown to him. When he rode through the narrow lanes, they paused in their work to stare. Some crossed themselves, others dropped their tools and backed away in awe, for Oisín's face was unchanged, his bearing noble, and the white horse gleamed as if woven from light. To them he seemed a spirit out of story, and in truth he was. He asked of Fionn Cumhaill, and they shook their heads. He asked of Diarmuid, of Goll, of Cumhaill, each name meeting silence or puzzled frown. A grey-haired farmer at last told him, with a voice gentle and unsure, that such names belonged to old tales told by firesides, stories from the time before sense came to air. Oisín's heart faltered then, for he understood. What had been his yesterday was now the memory of centuries. Sometimes he thought time was a sea, and he had crossed not its surface but its depths. He turned from the village and rode toward the places where he had once hunted. The glens were there, but changed. Streams he had known now wandered through new beds. Stones where the Fianna had sat were half buried beneath ivy. The very air carried the weight of absence, and yet in the hush between his horse's steps he almost thought he heard them, the faint laughter of his companions drifting through the heather, a horn far away, a dog's bark fading on the wind. He followed those ghosts until the path led him to a wide clearing at the edge of a valley. There he saw men at labour, lifting great stones for a chapel rising where once had stood a ring of old oak. Their hands were rough, their clothes humble, yet their eyes were bright with purpose. They did not seem warriors, but builders of prayer. Oisín watched them quietly, for though he did not know their god, he recognised the devotion in their movements. One of them saw him and called out, astonished. They gathered, marvelling at the rider whose face seemed untouched by years. They asked who he was, and Oisín, feeling the wind still warm on his cheek, answered simply that he had been of the Fianna, son of Fionn. Murmurs spread among them. Some smiled gently, others shook their heads, whispering that such names belonged only to legend. He listened, half in wonder, half in grief, until he saw one man struggling with a heavy stone. Compassion stirred him from stillness. Without thought he leaned down from his saddle to help. His hand grasped the rock, and in that instant it slipped from his grasp and touched the ground. The white horse reared, neighing in sorrow, and Oisín's foot brushed the earth. He felt it immediately, the weight of all the years he had outrun. It fell upon him like winter descending upon leaves. His hair whitened, his limbs trembled, his skin, untouched by time for centuries, folded into the gentle lines of age. The men before him gasped as if witnessing the world turn from day to night. The white horse, crying softly, rose upon its hind legs and vanished into mist, leaving only the echo of hooves fading into the unseen. Oisín lay upon the ground where once he had stood immortal. The men, in awe and fear, gathered round. They wrapped him in cloth and carried him within the half-built chapel. There, on a bed of straw, he rested as they whispered to one another that an ancient hero had returned from beyond the world. Word spread quickly, and soon a holy man came to speak with him. Some said it was Patrick himself, come to see the wonder for his own eyes. Oisín listened to the calm voice beside him, speaking of faith and eternity, and he smiled faintly. Eternity, he said, I have seen, and it is beautiful, but it is not home. His eyes turned toward the west, where through a narrow window the sea glimmered faintly beneath the pale sky. The land beyond the sea is gentle, he whispered, but it is still. Time does not pass there, and without time there is no song. The Fianna sang because the world changed, because the dawn gave way to dusk, and the hunt to the feast. Without loss there is no remembering. The holy man bowed his head, saying nothing, for the truth in those words was older than Scripture. Sometimes Oisín thought eternal youth was not a gift, but a silence too deep for song. He spoke then of Niamh, how her hair shone brighter than the dawn, how her eyes held sorrow hidden beneath calm, how a world knew neither birth nor death. He told them of the silver rivers and endless twilight, and the gardens where laughter lingered like perfume in the air. As he spoke, his voice softened, and for a moment the listeners forgot their fear of him. They saw, not a relic of legend, but a man who had loved and lost and remembered too much. His strength waned with the telling, though his heart remained clear. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the scent of rain from the west. He asked to be set where he might see the sea once more, and they carried him to the doorway. There he watched the horizon shimmer, a faint glint of light moving far away, like a reflection of something unseen. In that shimmer, he thought he saw the white horse again, and a figure upon it, hair like gold flowing in the breeze. He smiled. The builders thought it a trick of light, but Oisín's eyes were steady. Sometimes memory is a bridge, and sometimes it is a tide. The wind grew gentle, and the light upon the sea brightened until it seemed the sky itself was opening. He felt neither fear nor sorrow, only peace. The weight of years no longer pressed upon him. Somewhere beyond the waves he imagined a land of unending calm, where laughter drifted softly through meadows that never faded. And as the light deepened, the watchers swore they heard faint music rising from the sea, a harp's voice, carried far upon the wind, growing softer and softer, until it became part of the silence. Where the mist had closed, another morning opened, one without time or tide, as if the world itself had chosen stillness over motion. Oisín's story, though told now in hushes and glances, lingered like sea air in the breath of air. The men who had carried him remembered the look in his eyes, not one of fear, nor regret, but something deeper, quieter, a knowing that even endings are part of a rhythm far older than grief. In the days that followed, they spoke of him not as a relic, but as a thread through which the old and the new touched hands. The chapel stones, once lifted with toil and sweat, now bore his name in whispers between prayers. Some said he had been a man, others a vision sent to bridge what had been and what was now. But none who looked upon the sea again ever doubted that a truth beyond words had brushed the edge of their world. In the memory of that final moment, when the light shifted on the western tide and something unseen seemed to wait, there lived a sense of something unfinished, something carried still. They would say, in quiet voices, that Oisín had not died, not truly, but had returned into the folds of what lies beyond, the land where no sorrow takes root and time sleeps softly beneath golden trees. And in that land, where the sky never dims and the grasses hum with stillness, Niamh of the golden hair stood upon a quiet hill. Her gaze was cast eastward, though her world held no sun. She watched the sea with eyes that did not blink, and though no breeze stirred her golden hair, something in her shimmered faintly, as though the very light remembered. Time did not pass there, and so she did not wait. But there was a kind of patience in her, like a harp holding its breath before the next song. Sometimes she walked through the fields alone, her hands brushing the tall stalks of silver-petalled flowers that opened always and never wilted. Sometimes she sat beside the still river that reflected nothing but sky, her face a calm the world could not disturb. And though her lips never moved, the land itself seemed to listen, as though she spoke through silence, telling the wind a story no longer tied to the shape of days. Some nights, though they were not truly nights, for the light did not change, she would return to the grove where she and Oisín had once walked, and the memory would rise like mist around her. She would close her eyes, not in longing but in recognition. The story had turned, that was all. Sometimes she thought love was not a tether, but a tide that flowed even where footsteps could not follow. Back in air, the seasons resumed their turning. The rains fell as they always had, and the bogs held their secrets beneath rustling reeds. New names rose and old ones softened into legend. Yet here and there a child would walk the cliffs and peer westward, asking if the light on the water was merely sunlight, or something more. And in dreams the Fianna still hunted. They moved through the green hills in silence, not aged, not changed, but carried like song in the marrow of the land. They lived in the hush of the glens and the curl of mist along mountain tops. Some say that in the right kind of sleep you might hear their hounds, or the snap of a bowstring far off, or a low voice reciting lines only the rivers remember. Oisín was among them in those dreams, not the aged man who lay upon straw, but the one who had leapt into the saddle behind Niamh, with eyes wide open to the sea. He stood in those dreams as tall as ever, his harp resting against his side, his gaze soft as twilight. He did not speak, but his presence was enough. Sometimes, in deep slumber, he stood once more beside his father on a hilltop watching the deer move through the heather. Fionn would say nothing, only nod. the way a man does when everything that needs saying already lives between breaths. And in the land of eternal youth, the song of Oisín lived on, not as lament but as quiet harmony, the kind that hums beneath a meadow's hush or lingers in the warmth of a late summer wind. Tir na Nog held his echo, just as Éire held his memory. Neither tried to claim him. Each let him drift like mist between worlds. Sometimes he thought that home was not a place, but the space between memory and forgetting. In sleep, that space opens gently, a field under moonlight that never wanes, the faint shape of a horse crossing a silvered sea, a song too soft to be heard, but felt in the chest like the hush before rain. And so the tale rests, like a stone placed gently on the cairn, like the last light over a quiet bay. Oisín, the poet of the Fianna, the rider to Tir na Nog, lives now in the rhythm of stories told beneath blankets, near firelight, or within the breathless quiet just before dreams. As the sea draws its tide and the mist curls back toward the hills, let your thoughts drift where the white horse rides, and time has no weight. Let the hush take you. When the years lay soft like leaves, he remembered, not in sharp flashes, but in the way twilight lingers over hills before night fully comes. In that gentlest space where story becomes dream, Oisín lived still, not in the body that had turned to dust beneath chapel stone, nor in the carvings that followed his name through the slow centuries, but in the shimmer of memory itself, woven into the land like morning mist. His tale, cradled between worlds, never broke apart. It stretched like a beam of light through drifting cloud, changing shape but never dimming, and those who close their eyes in quiet rooms, who let the hum of sleep soften the edges of waking thought, could still find him riding that white horse across the western sea, always riding, always returning, and yet never truly gone. He belonged to no one place. Tir na Nog had held his laughter, Éire his sorrow, and the tide, something deeper, his choice. For though he had gone with Niamh into the lands where time stood still, and though he had left his people behind, he had returned. Not out of regret, but out of love. That love had cost him his youth, and his return had cost him the world he'd known, but still he had chosen it. Sometimes he thought that loss was the way light entered the heart, and now, in the hush of dreams, he came not as a man of battles or songs, but as something quieter, a presence felt rather than seen. The hills carried his memory like breath, the glens whispered his name beneath their moss, and the sea which had taken and returned him curled around the island's edges like a lullaby that never ends. In Tir na Nog the twilight continued, neither rising nor fading. Niamh, unchanged and unaging, walked through her world with silence in her step. The meadows still bloomed without ceasing, the silver rivers still ran, and the trees still bent to a wind that did not blow. But now, when she stood beside the sea's edge, her gaze held a depth it had not held before. The horizon, once a simple border between world and sky, had become something else, a threshold. She never spoke of him aloud. She did not need to. The land remembered. In the crystal pools where starlight lingered, in the hush beneath the trees where birds nested in eternal calm, in the curling petals of flowers that never closed, the story of Oisín echoed like the last note of a harp, not ending, not repeating, but held forever in the breath between. And in Éire, the children of many generations wandered westward to the cliffs. They stood where the sky opened widest, where the wind lifted their hair, and the gulls wheeled high, and they looked out toward the horizon as if searching for a figure on horseback. Some said they saw it, most said they dreamed it. But all who heard the story, whispered beside peat fires, written in the margins of old books, murmured in the hush before sleep, carried it forward. Because stories, like tides, always return. Sometimes, in sleep, when the mind has loosened its grip on time, you may find yourself walking beside a figure whose eyes are deep with sky, whose hands once touched the bark of ancient trees, and whose heart carries a weight older than sorrow. He will not speak, but you will know him, and in that knowing there will be peace. For Oisín's tale was never about escape, nor regret, nor even longing, but about the space between, the balance of joy and loss, of youth and time, of memory and the letting go of it. Sometimes, at the very edge of sleep, it is said the white horse returns, not to carry you away, but to remind you, the stillness waits for no one, and yet it is always there, a sea without end, a twilight without fear, a path that leads not forward or back but inward, to the part of you that remembers even what you have never lived. So if you find yourself drifting now, let it be gently. Let the wind carry you west, where no clocks chime, where no names age, and where the grass rises soft beneath your feet. You are neither here nor gone, you are in the quiet.